Let's take a trip down memory lane and revisit the best playoff series the Jazz have played in the past decade.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, excited to be back with you guys, filling in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. As most of you guys know by now, I'm a Jazz fan that will live and die with this team. Credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 23 and 24 NBA Combines, Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician the past 4 seasons, and lover of college hoops. So I'll make sure you know what you need to know about your beloved Utah Jazz. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. Remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, what is your favorite playoff series from the past decade? This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Today on the show, I'm going to rank out my top 3 favorite playoff series from the past decade. I thought about doing since 2000, but I thought that would be difficult to do because there's a lot of them and they take a while to explain. So let's dive right in. The Jazz, my third favorite series, is a painful one. It's one that I remember vividly because I loved the basketball. It was so good, but the end was just bitter. You could not have had a worse finish to a fantastic series than what the Jazz suffered in the bubble. The Jazz came into the bubble playing well, but I wouldn't say had extreme expectations to make a deep run. But the history that people speak of now is if a tiny thing goes differently, we could have won it all. I don't necessarily agree with that, but man, that series was awesome. The Jazz got up 3-1, even without Bogey, and 2 games were without Mike Conley as he joined his wife for the birth of his son. And the Jazz even started a guy like Juwan Morgan, and it worked. Quinn Snyder was a mad scientist in this series and did fantastically to give us a chance. The Donovan versus Jamal Murray was a duel I hadn't seen in a long time from 2 guys who played the same role. They were otherworldly. I remember after game 1, I was in school in college in Zoom classes, and people asked, "Oh, how'd you spend your day yesterday or something aside from the assignment?" And I said, I rewatched the Jazz lose an agonizing game 1 that they should have won because I couldn't understand how we lost. And I remember saying that, people laughing. And I was like, man, I watched the whole thing all over. It was painful. But I'll go to my grave saying and complaining that 8-second call where the Jazz did not cross half court, Donovan Mitchell kind of lollygagged his way up, but the clock started at 6 was destiny that the Jazz were going to lose this series in some excruciating fashion, because that, to my knowledge, was about as excruciating of a way you could lose that game. Instead of taking a chance to add to the lead, it became their basketball, and that was a swinging point in that game, and to me, really changed the series. However, Donovan's pretty hard to blame, as he averaged 36 points per game in that series, including 2 50-point games with 57 and 51. Jamal Murray was unbelievable as well. He scored nearly 32 per game in that series with back-to-back 50 balls. And he also had 42 in another game. And that was the first playoff series in NBA history where 2 players scored 50 in the exact same game. So let's go game by game quickly, or at least cover bits and pieces of it. And we'll do that for the other series as well. The Jazz dropped game 1 that they probably should have won, and then won 3 in a row, 2 of them decisively, and 1 very, very close, game 4, 129-127. In that game 4, Donovan had 51, Murray had 50, Mike had 26, Clarkson had 24, and the efficiency offensively of both teams, but for the Jazz that we're going to speak about, was unbelievable, especially without Bojan Bogdanovic, who was the second leading scorer on that team. Game 5, the Jazz lost, and the Nuggets continued to torch the Jazz with Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, 2-man game, and Murray could not be stopped. I remember thinking, man, why don't we just play Shaq Harrison? Because, we're not struggling to score the basketball. We're struggling to stop him. And if we can stop Jamal Murray, we can win this series. I was desperate. I would have tried anything. I even thought guarding him with Donovan Mitchell was the best chance. More on that thought later. Game 5, the Nuggets were better. They deserved to win. Game 6, the Nuggets were in control and deserved to win that one, winning by double digits once more. Game 7, you expected it to be lower because those are the best 2 words in sports. Game 7. But between prolific offenses, you did not expect the rock fight that ensued. And the Jazz put everything, and I mean everything, into stopping Jamal Murray, including the Jazz guarding Jamal Murray with their best offensive player, Donovan Mitchell. And Mike Conley and Donovan were exhausted. You could see very early in this game, they were exhausted from guarding Jamal Murray, and they lacked their usual scoring punch. Jokic had 30, along with scoring the go-ahead shot with 27 seconds, and they'd been trading baskets forever in that fourth quarter. So I remember thinking that when I was prepping this out, thinking, man, they traded baskets the entire fourth quarter, and no one could build the lead, and it was close throughout, and it was incredible defense because it wasn't like, oh, there's a three, here's another three. No, it was every basket that was scored felt like a gut punch, and then someone would answer it right back, and then there'd be an and one, and the dramatic way of all these pauses between buckets made everything feel even larger in the moment. So let's analyze that fourth quarter. It turns out the Jazz started that fourth quarter down by 5. They had trailed by more than that, made a push in the third, and they went on an 8-0 run to start the quarter, led 68-65. So what I recall was that from the entire fourth quarter, from around 65 onward, the Jazz and Nuggets traded baskets. It turns out recollection was correct. The Jazz went on an 8-0 run to make it 68-65. From there, it was 65 at one point. The Jazz went up by 3 to complete that 8-0 run. Then it became 68-68. And then it was 70-68 for the Nuggets, 70-70, 72-70, 72, 75-75. It was matching a basket. You look at that play-by-play, and you see if you look at the NBA reference or basketball reference, the NBA page, it has it color-coded for lead changes and ties, and everything's illuminated. That's how you know it was a great basketball game. Not just a miraculous comeback that maybe some would say it was, but it was far more than just that frenetic final sequence that we're going to investigate. Gary Harris stepped into this game. The Jazz have been attacking Jeremy Grant. They've been playing Torrey Craig. The Jazz had been mercilessly attacking Michael Porter Jr., a very young Michael Porter Jr., attacking him so much so he hardly played in some of these games. And Gary Harris came back later in the series, and he was a big reason that they won this game, as he stripped Donovan Mitchell from behind late in the game. And then Torrey Craig runs ahead, has a layup, and it says, oh, we're done. Or he could just run out the clock. Instead, Torrey Craig misses the layup. With 4 seconds left, Rudy gets the rebound, stepped out of bounds, but, that doesn't matter. I don't care about that. The ref missed that. So if people are going to have their revisionist history, so be it. He stepped out, throws an outlet to Mike, and Mike, you know the rest. The three was amazingly close. And I will tell you my experience. I was crouched, sitting on the left side of the couch in my college apartment with my roommate, who doesn't care too much about basketball, but became a Jazz fan through this, ordered a Joe Ingles jersey that was hanging in our apartment, and he was wearing it. I was wearing my Donovan jersey, and I'm sitting there crouched between the couch and the table, just begging this ball to go. And I remember leaning because I think the ball's going a little left. He missed it left. And I'm leaning, trying to make the ball go in. And so much so, I ended up falling over. And I wasn't even mad that we lost. I was devastated, but it was such an amazing series. I couldn't be as mad as some of the other times the Jazz have lost in the playoffs, because we were outplayed, or the Clippers won in the 2020, the following year, when the Jazz were great. And I thought we could win a championship or be at least close, and we lost. I was frustrated for everything. This one was just sadness because it was such a great series that the series was over. And even in defeat, this cracks my top 3. It feels like an honorable mention. Had I gone for the past 20 years, I would have had another series. I would have had Jazz versus Rockets, where we win in 7. We go to Houston and win that series over T-Mac and Yao. But I wanted to make this one something because that's the last time the Jazz fans could really feel, and this was a great series. Whereas the Clippers, we lost, and that one just stings. This one, at least there's some bittersweetness to. I wish we had won. I wonder how far we could have gone. A big what if is if Mike Conley hits that shot. How much does that change? How much belief do the Jazz have the next year? But even in an agonizing defeat, this cracks my top 3. So there's 3 series, and that's one of them. The next 2 I'm going to tell you about, these ones are in descending order. My least favorite to my favorite. These, of course, are all my favorite series because they're great. They're coming up ranked in descending order, and I'm curious your thoughts as to which one you like more. All that and more coming straight ahead on Locked On Jazz. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money, all in one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy to use interface. And it's all on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does all the heavy lifting for you so you can link your accounts in just minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. So if you have something that you don't use, they'll go through all your subscriptions and point out the ones you don't use. For me, it was Hulu, and they pointed out I haven't used it in years, and it's canceling that alone has saved me money each month. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com and in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at Monarch Money with code LOCKEDONNBA. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz, guys. Really appreciate you guys listening. And I have an important request for you guys. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make our favorite podcast and your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. So go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. And thank you guys for helping us out. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can scan the little QR code at the bottom. Thank you guys once again. So without further ado, let's get to the next playoff series. It is the Oklahoma City Thunder series from the Jazz, Donovan's rookie year. This is number 2 for me in my favorite series in the last decade because it was so sweet, because it was improbable the Jazz made a run. We lost Gordon Hayward. The agony of that July 4th, I remember exactly where I was when I learned that, and that Gordon Hayward wasn't coming back. It's also the same day Kevin Durant changed the landscape of the NBA, but, who's counting, right? The July 4th had been an eventful day many times. Now, I think Gordon Hayward leaving is going to spell years of prolonged misery for the Jazz after we just finally made a run. We just finally made a run to the playoffs and beaten the Clippers in 7 games the year before. And now he's gone, and I don't think we have much of a chance. I love the Donovan Mitchell piece. I wrote a piece when I was a junior in high school saying we need to draft Donovan Mitchell, and we traded up and took him. I was elated. That's the most happy I've ever been about a Jazz draft selection. Ace Bailey rivals that. But let's get into the series. The Jazz beat the Thunder in 6. Game 1, there was Russell Westbrook and Paul George, and it was the raucous home crowd of the OKC fans. The Jazz had Donovan lead the way with 27, and the second highest output was Rudy with 14. The Jazz had 7 in double digits, but came up short. But the series swung in game 2, not just because the Jazz stole the first road game, but I think the tenor of the series took on a tone that the Jazz wanted to play, not the Thunder wanted to play. Mitchell scored 28, 13 of which in the fourth quarter, leading to a huge road win. And Donovan, in doing so, became the first rookie since Michael Jordan to score 55-plus points in his first 2 playoff games. That's incredible company, obviously. He showed incredible poise and maturity. The national conversation became, is Donovan already the best player in this series without those accolades over Paul George and Russell Westbrook? And not to be forgotten, Derek Favors, who is just such a great Jazz man. 20 points, 16 board. Derek Favors in all the big games came up big and had important performances. He dominated the offensive glass. And he came up huge for the Jazz to swing this tone of the series, playing a bruising role and battling on the interior with a guy like Steven Adams. The story in this one was the cold finish for the Thunder on their home court. The Thunder led late in this game, but the offense fell apart, and Paul George had 0 in the fourth quarter, which is, it started the whole thing of how does Paul George play in the playoffs? More on that to come. Game 3 was the tricky Ricky Rubio game. Ricky Rubio had a triple-double, his first career playoff triple-double, of course. Shot very well from the field, controlled the game's tempo, and most importantly, kept Russell Westbrook off balance. He made him work, and he outplayed him on both ends of the floor. And this is what triggered Russell Westbrook's now famous quote before the following game, Game 4, I'm going to shut that blank off next game. Russell Westbrook was so frustrated that Ricky Rubio outplayed him, he then began forcing things. And Donovan in this game scored 22 of his 33 points in the second half. He, once again, was fantastic. And it was just the inefficiency for Russell Westbrook that was the point. Like, he scored, but not enough. And he shot more shots than he scored points. and he also had 8 turnovers. And he and Carmelo Anthony both seemed out of sync in this game, which I think made the pressure shift to Paul George, and more on that to come too. So that brings us to game 4. Rubio had another solid game. That was going to be the storyline. Okay, Russ says he's going to shut the water off for Ricky Rubio and no more of that stuff. Rubio was fine, undeterred. Russ was out of the game early with foul trouble, picking up 4 fouls before halftime, trying super hard to pressure Rubio and impose his will on the game. Donovan, once again, put his name in a history book with Michael Jordan, so with back-to-back 30-point games, becoming the first rookie to do so since Michael. And the Jazz controlled the pace of this game, made key buckets when it mattered most. And this is the game in which I felt like Donovan Mitchell kind of staked his claim as, yeah, I'm the best player on the floor in this series. The game got physical. That's what I remember. Jay Crowder and Steven Adams getting tangled up. There were double technicals issued. Westbrook and Rubio also both earned technicals. And the Jazz completely stifled the Thunder's ISO-heavy offense. The OKC shot just 20% from 3 in this game. So the Jazz are up 3-1. 3-1 against the Thunder. This is a super team versus a team that is vastly overperforming. That was the narrative going on. And game 5, this one hurt. The Jazz were up. The Jazz were up big. And it looked over. The Jazz had this in the bag and did not win it. And, if you were to think about games that are big what ifs, I think this one's going to be overshadowed by the collapse against the Clippers a couple years down the road from here. But I think that game 5, Jazz OKC, is one of the collapses that, because we won the series, I became okay with. And I would never have been okay with it if we had lost the series. Never, ever. Like, when I reviewed my notes on this, I remember being like, I remember we were up, but I didn't realize we were up like that. The Jazz, to go through this for you, stifled the OKC Thunder in the second quarter. Absolutely stifled them. The Jazz were up. They scored 12 points in the second quarter of the Thunder. That's what I was researching there for a moment. And the Jazz were up 5 after that. So they're up 15 at half. You feel we're up 15. They're panicking. We're going to win this game. Au contraire, we did not do so. Russ was very, very impressive in this game. And this was his statement, like, yeah, I've won an MVP here before. Like, don't necessarily count me out. I'm going to put up 45, 15, and 7. Paul George was also very good in this one, 34 points. And this is hey, yeah, I'm not sure Donovan Mitchell's the best player in the series. Like, that's what that one said. Donovan still had a good game. He had 23 points, but his game was less efficient. He had 22 shots to earn that, and the Jazz offense became stagnant, much like the Thunder's had in other games where they've stalled. The OKC crowd was deafening, even through the TV. And if it came back to OKC in game 7, I did not like our chances. That said, it's coming back to Utah, but it was now or never. We must win right here. And the Jazz defeated the Thunder in a dramatic, physical, gritty game 6 to win the series 4-2. And the Jazz team that was young, improbably there, led by a rookie who started the season backing up Rodney Hood, it dominated. And Donovan Mitchell staked his claim as one of the best players in the NBA to watch for the next decade. Donovan had 22 points in the second half, or excuse me, in the third quarter of the following game. Donovan Mitchell, and the funny part is both these teams were, solid offensive team. Like, all Quinn Snyder teams were going to be solid offensively. But these games were so dominated by the defense of Rudy Gobert, the physicality of a guy like Steven Adams. And this is the game where I felt like Donovan Mitchell became him. He scored 38 points, 22 of which in the third quarter. And 22 points in the third quarter is great, but he took over the game. He created those shots all by himself because everything else had gotten stagnant the day before, and he struggled, and he had this confidence, this poise, this charisma to take over the game in a game that had players like Paul George, who had an MVP-esque season with OKC, which actually happened to be the year after this. But there was the reigning MVP, Russell Westbrook, was on the other side. And he had 45 the game before. Yet Donovan seemed more at ease and able to score his own stuff. He had 38 and 5, and he was 14 and 26 from the field. And he became the first rookie since Michael Jordan to score 38 in a playoff closeout game. Once again, joining the illustrious company. And the Jazz, this is the biggest storyline that everyone remembers now, but I don't feel like it stayed in my head at this point. until the game was over. But Paul George scored just 5 points. 5 points after scoring 34 the game before. And he was 2 of 16 from the field. And this is where the Joe Ingles owns Paul George stuff came out. It's the playoff P narrative. And Russ was dynamic. He really tried hard, scored 46 points, 10 boards, 5 assists, but he shot 43 times. Let me reiterate that. 43 times. 43 of the 93 attempts by the Thunder were taken by Russell Westbrook. And he took 8 of the last 9 shots for the Thunder in their closing moments. And why not? He was trying so hard to will them back, but he went cold in those final minutes. And the Jazz eked out an improbable victory. And the Jazz were a balanced attack. And the Thunder had only 2 players scoring double digits, Westbrook and Steven Adams. And the Jazz had this team that was extra. This was an extra sweet win because it was a team that we didn't expect to do well after losing Gordon Hayward. And they played so well together as a team versus a supposed super team with Paul George, Russell Westbrook, and Carmelo Anthony. And they never fit together, yet they were still favored in the series. And the Jazz were the better team and won. So let's talk about my favorite series coming up next. And as I talked about that one, I maybe even convinced myself that that was better. But I don't know. I think this one that I'm going to say, the Clippers series in 2017, the twists and turns, the roller coaster of it all, is my favorite series of the last decade. Let's explore that one next on Locked On Jazz. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Thulin with you here. It's fun going down memory lane, talking about playoff series. Yesterday, we talked about how soon the Jazz can win a series, so I felt like I'd dig into the old series and give some, positive nostalgia coming your way. So the Jazz beat the Clippers in 7 games in 2017, and this was an emotional roller coaster. I also attended a few games in this series, and maybe that's why I like this one more than the one that I just talked about. And it brought me, thinking about these games brought me back because I was fortunate enough to attend games in the D-Will days where the Jazz lost the Lakers time in and time out. But I went to those games and booed the Lakers every time they touched the ball, and every time the Jazz would score, it would be deafening. And this is the last time I really felt that, was this series right here. It was against the Clippers. It was the Jazz first playoff appearance since 2012. The Lob City era was coming to a close. There are a lot of storylines to this. And it starts out in LA, and it's a nightmare scenario. The Jazz, 17 seconds in, lose Rudy Gobert as he and Luke Richard Bahamute bump knees, and Rudy Gobert appears to be out as he's out for the game. They tell us, oh, yeah, he's hurt his knee. And you think the worst, like, oh, we're going to get swept. Like, everyone's being all fatalistic. And I remember being at a national tennis tournament in Las Vegas, sitting inside of a Panera, just complaining to my family, oh my gosh, how can we lose in this horrible fashion 17 seconds in? With their defensive anchor out, Rudy Gobert out, Derek Favors comes in, steps in once again, D-Faves, does his thing. This is a grit and grind game with the Jazz relying on a very, very balanced egalitarian attack. Chris Paul and Blake Griffin were fantastic. Chris Paul was amazing this whole series. And once again, I don't know why people could disrespect Chris Paul because he was so good. Blake had 26, struggled late in the game, and didn't get many looks in crunch time. The Jazz win this game. It's tied at 95 apiece. Let me paint the picture for you. The Jazz inbound with 13 seconds. Joe Johnson, isolated on the left wing, drives into the paint and hits a floater. And it's just this tantalizing bounce as it sits there, soft touch, and he puts it in. And it felt like time was going so slowly, and slow-mo ISO Joe gets it done. The Jazz win game 1. Improbable again. Game 2, you knew that the Clippers were favored. The Clips were favored, and they bounced back with urgency. And they had marquee performances from Blake and Chris. Like they had a huge first half push with Rudy still out. They made a point to attack the paint, get to the middle, go to the dunkers, DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin. DeAndre had a monster game with Rudy out. He controlled the paint, had 18 and 15 with 3 blocks. And Chris Paul, once again, controlled the tempo like a maestro. And Gordon Hayward, without Rudy Gobert's presence, had to work super, super hard, scoring 20, but he was 5 of 15 from the field. So that shifted the series to Utah. And you got to feel good. 1-1, Rudy Gobert's out, but Gobert was still out. So I didn't feel like we were the advantaged team heading back to Salt Lake. And Gordon Hayward was fantastic in this game. He scored his playoff career high 40 on 13 of 21 from the field, 4 of 8 from 3, 10 of 11 from the line, carried the Jazz offensively from start to finish, and he took control in the third quarter, but it was just too little, too late, because he was great. The first Jazz player to score 40 in a playoff game in ages. But Chris Paul was even better. And that was so irritating to me that I loved Gordon Hayward. And Gordon Hayward had his career game. It was the ascension for Gordon Hayward, what I thought would end up being a long career with the Jazz. And this was just the first time he could play the prominent role at the playoffs. But Chris Paul at every juncture was better. And it drove me mad. 34, 10, and 7, Chris Paul, no turnovers. Once again, total command, hit clutch shots in the fourth quarter, ran the pick and roll to perfection, got his teammates involved at the right time, and took over at the right time. And I want to say this. I wrote this in all caps in my notes. People forget how good he was and discredit him, and I do not understand why. One of my favorite playoff series I've ever watched is the Spurs and Clippers from 2015, and this is the defending champion Spurs. They were separated by only a game between the 2 and 7 seed, and these guys battled it out, and all of a sudden the two Wake Forest products, Chris Paul and Tim Duncan, duel, and Chris Paul hits a fadeaway going off glass on the right side to bank it in and put him ahead. Chris Paul was that man. The one big thing to note going forward, though, is Blake Griffin left the game, and we did not know how healthy Blake was, and Rudy was getting healthier. So game 4, Rudy comes back and makes an impact, right? Like that is the story. Rudy Gobert comes back, and Blake Griffin is not there. And we have a chance now. We have a true chance because Blake's out. We're down 2-1, but he still got a chance to make it 2-2. But I don't think we had a chance if Rudy Gobert doesn't come back. And Rudy Gobert comes back. The other part of this is Blake's out, Rudy's back, but where's Gordon Hayward? He started the game, but he got food poisoning when we needed him most. Joe Johnson then became the answer to, once again, when we're missing one of our stars, he loomed large, scored 28 off the bench, and including 11 in the fourth quarter. Chris Paul was the best player on the floor once again, but he had to shoulder a larger load that became uncomfortable with Blake Griffin out. 27, 12, and 9 for Chris Paul, and he scored on 22 of their last 26 points. But the Jazz team defense was able to limit the other Clippers. And the other Clippers throughout the series, once Blake went out, became a no-show, and that's what helped the Jazz so much. No other Clipper had more than 15 points, and the Jazz were able to eke out a win, 105-98. So that sends the series back to LA at 2 apiece. And you'd say, okay, the Clippers have 2 of the next 3 at home, but the Jazz are healthier now, assuming Gordon Hayward comes back from food poisoning somewhat recovered. And he looked fully recovered. He had 27, 8, and 4, and the Jazz are pulling their weight. The Jazz are the team that looks more aggressive, more confident than the team that's been in the playoffs in so many of these battles. So many of these battles for years. And yet it's the Utah Jazz who look more comfortable. Obviously, Blake Griffin's out, and that matters. Blake Griffin was so good, man. I'm sitting here like looking at my notes and just disregarding them. The Jazz were able to win game 5 because Joe Johnson was clutch again. He had a clutch 3 and a key floater late in the fourth once again. CP3 was the best player on the floor once again. He outdueled Gordon Hayward, though Gordon was great. He had 28, 9, and 4. Jamal Crawford and J.J. Redick, once again, the others were not good. I remember this being an interesting story. J.J. Redick talked about this on his podcast, that Joe Ingles told him after one of the games, like, we're not letting you get involved and score, so you're going to have to play 4-on-4. I'm just going to deny you the ball the whole game. And Doc Rivers, JJ kind of bemoaned this in the podcast retrospectively. So he goes, Doc Rivers just said, okay, JJ, you got to be a decoy. We're going to win this 4-on-4. So Quinn Snyder won the chess match right there. And DeAndre Jordan was fine, but he wasn't as impactful because Rudy Gobert was back. The Clippers made a run to tie it, which was terrifying, but the Jazz responded with big buckets from Johnson, then Hood, then Hayward, and the Jazz had game 6 to close out at home, and I was there. The building was awesome. The game was awesome. I'd went to the game with a friend that I'd been going to games with my whole life. We'd gone to a couple playoff games when we were young, watching the Darren Williams teams, and everyone had the same shirts. I still have that shirt to this day, and everyone's loud as to be. It was such a fun night. I, in fact, ended up getting the flu, and before the region tennis championships the next day, which got postponed due to rain, I ended up having the flu and felt absolutely awful and lost like 10 pounds in the next week before making a recovery before the state tournament, thankfully. However, not a fun day. Not a fun day the next day because the Jazz lost. And it was awesome. I remember leaving the arena, the Jazz, you leave the arena thinking, man, we had the game in our hands. we had the game. We had the game because if the Jazz were able to win this game, then there's no worries going forward. Of course, that's what makes the drama of the NBA so fun. But I remember leaving the arena and the cameraman says, like, "Oh, smile for the camera," and everyone's just depressed. And I remember vividly telling my friend, "I don't know if we can win 3 in LA, but I guess we got to believe because we've already won 2 there." But Chris Paul seemed inevitable that night. He had 29 and 8, and DeAndre Jordan outplayed Rudy Gobert, and that was what stung so much because he had 18 rebounds, controlled the paint, and the Jazz just didn't have enough offense. It was just Gordon Hayward and George Hill. I haven't mentioned him yet. George Hill he had 22. He was really good. But that seemed to be the only offense, Gordon and George Hill. And it was Chris Paul just orchestrating at a superb level, creating for the Clippers, and the Jazz couldn't match it. So you had to think, okay, it's going to be Chris Paul versus the Jazz, and I'm going to take Chris Paul. Like, I remember feeling that way, but at least we'd won a couple, and maybe fatigue would get the better of the Clippers. Maybe, because Blake Griffin's out and JJ Redick and Jamal Crawford haven't done that much. Jamal Crawford had a better game in game 6. Chris Paul stole game 6, and then we go to game 7, and that's how I felt. The Jazz closed out the series with a convincing 104-91 win on the Clippers home court, and that was the Jazz's first playoff victory in the series in 7 years, marking a major milestone for the franchise after, that felt like the doldrums with Tyrone Corbin, and the Jazz just didn't really have much of a chance to win in those years. They'd missed on some picks. It felt like eons ago that Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer had the Jazz in the Western Conference Finals in 2007. So the Jazz had won twice already in LA, but one of them they didn't have Rudy. So you had to believe they had a chance. And now the Jazz have Rudy. The Clippers don't have Blake. And the Jazz used huge second and third quarters to open a lead, and they never quite looked back. It got close at times. It got a little nervy, but the Jazz had 7 score in double digits, led by Hayward's 26, and Favors had 17 and 11 off the bench. Once again, Derek Favors, whenever you needed him, delivered. And for the Clippers, it was just not Chris Paul's night. And when that started to become the theme, it wasn't just like, oh, he's missed a couple, but in fact, he scored only 13 points on 19 shots. You had to believe that this was the time for the Jazz against a weary team that just didn't have the juice anymore. DeAndre Jordan had a huge game, 24 and 18, but only he, Chris Paul, and Jamal Crawford reached double digits. So once again, it was a shorthanded effort. The ancillary pieces for the Clippers did not produce, and the Lob City Clippers were no more. They were unhealthy, fell apart, and they had yet another horrible finish to what was a superbly fun team to watch. This team had so many disappointing playoff runs, and I think that weight of not having won altogether was starting to carry a significant weight, and Blake Griffin's injury just sunk in a little bit of a blade that they had in the back, and they had to just rely on only Chris Paul, and no one else could help drag him out of that pain. And the Jazz ended what should have been and could have been an NBA dynasty in terms of their talent, or that's how they were perceived. But yet the Utah Jazz, the small market team, topped the big team led by a guy who's torched the Jazz for years and years, and Chris Paul, and the Jazz won in game 7. Because I went to those games, those ones matter a ton to me. I love those games. And I just think that series was so fun to see a team growing together. And of course, if I'd known that Gordon Hayward would not play for the Jazz again after that, I don't know if I'd rank it as highly. But I remember watching that thinking, man, the Jazz have something. We just need one more piece and we can get better and better. The Warriors will move on. They're not going to be as good once Kevin Durant moves out of there. I was blind. I was hopeful. I was naive, but I really thought the Jazz would have Gordon Hayward and Rudy Gobert forever. Maybe they could have gotten Donovan Mitchell too. I mean, they got him, and they still had Gordon on the team until July 4th. And I really thought that you could get this team over the hump and win a championship. And that's why I thought so highly of that series. The twists and turns, the injuries, the lack of probability of winning 3 on the road, only taking only one of the home games was stunning to me as such a good home crowd. And it was awesome. But what do you guys think? What's your favorite playoff series? Any moments I'm missing here? And it's so fun to talk about the playoffs. It makes me happy. I've been smiling since I started preparing this a couple hours ago. Let me know what you guys think. Put your comments below. Tell me other playoff series. I wanted to talk about the 07 one against the Rockets as well, but it's fun to think about. It really is. It's made me smile. I want to be back in the playoffs. And maybe tomorrow we'll talk about some of the more playoff games. We'll see about that. Thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there's no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find the Locked On NBA podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.